Have you ever woken up from a nightmare so vivid, so disturbingly real, that even after your eyes adjusted to the darkness of your room, you still felt trapped in its grasp? Imagine a dream where every detail feels sharper than life itself, a haunting world that follows you, lingering at the edges of your vision. That's what happened to me. My name is Elias Ward, an architect with a passion for uncovering the past, a job that often takes me into the darkest corners of forgotten history. But nothing, no abandoned structure or eerie ruin, has ever shaken me as much as what I experienced in that single dream. It was just the beginning of a horror that clung to me like a shadow, growing darker with each passing day. In the depths of that night, as I drifted into sleep, the world around me seemed to dissolve, and I found myself in a place that defied logic, a mansion looming in the darkness, covered in the weight of countless years. It was as if the walls were alive, breathing with secrets long buried. The air was thick, almost choking, filled with the pungent scent of mildew and something rotten, something dead. A faint, rhythmic dripping echoed in the silence, each drop reverberating through the vast emptiness, amplifying the silence until it felt like it was crushing my chest. I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the ground, as if the floor itself was determined to keep me there, to make me face whatever horrors lay hidden within. There was an overwhelming sense of familiarity, a twisted kind of déjà vu. I knew I'd never been to this place, yet every corner, every shadow felt as if it had waited for me. The darkness stretched out in all directions, with only the dim light of flickering candles casting ghastly shadows that seemed to twist and writhe on the walls. My heart pounded louder with every step, each beat echoing like a drum in a void. I wanted to turn back, to wrench myself out of this dream, but something kept pulling me forward, deeper into the unknown, as if the mansion itself were drawing me into its core, its heart of darkness. Before we dive into the full nightmare that unfolded, I need you to join me on this journey. Subscribe to the channel and hit that like button, because the story I'm about to tell you isn't just any story. It's one that will make you question the boundaries between dreams and reality. It's not for the faint of heart, and it's only for those who dare to confront the shadows that dwell just beyond the veil of our understanding. It began innocently enough, a night like any other, quiet, unremarkable. But when I closed my eyes, I found myself standing somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere that radiated a suffocating darkness. I was in a vast, decaying hall, its high ceilings shrouded in shadows that seemed to pulse, almost breathing. Cold drafts crept through broken windows, carrying with them an acrid scent, a mix of mold, earth, and something metallic, like the bitter smell of rusted iron. It clung to the back of my throat, a reminder that whatever lay before me wasn't some harmless figment of my imagination. The hall itself seemed to stretch endlessly, its once ornate walls now peeling and stained with strange dark streaks, like veins spidering across the plaster. I couldn't shake the feeling that the place was ancient, that it held memories too dark to share, trapped within its crumbling structure. As I took a tentative step forward, the wooden floor groaned beneath me, each creak echoing like a warning, urging me to turn back. But curiosity, a twisted, irresistible curiosity, kept me moving forward. The air grew colder, dense, wrapping around me like unseen hands. Every shadow seemed to shift and twitch, as if watching, waiting for something. Then there was a sound, a low, almost imperceptible hum. It vibrated through the hall, filling the silence with a chilling dissonance that settled deep in my bones. I strained to listen, feeling drawn to the source, even as dread pooled in my stomach. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a faint whisper, words I couldn't quite catch, but that felt disturbingly familiar. It was like someone or something was trying to reach me, calling from behind the walls. I wanted to scream, to shake myself awake, but my body felt paralyzed, my senses dulled yet horrifyingly heightened at the same time. As I moved deeper into the hall, a dim light caught my attention, flickering from a doorway just ahead. It cast strange, erratic shadows that danced across the floor, twisting in ways that defied logic. My pulse quickened as I approached, the walls seeming to close in around me, suffocating, oppressive. The smell of decay intensified, becoming almost unbearable. I could feel my skin prickle, as if something was crawling just beneath the surface, as though the very air was alive with secrets and malevolence. And then, as I reached the doorway, a soft sound broke the silence, a slow, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails scraping against wood. It came from within, beckoning, daring me to step inside. The tapping grew louder, faster, almost frantic, as if it knew I was near, as if it could sense my presence. My hand trembled as I pushed the door open, revealing a room dimly lit by a single candle on a rotting table. The flame flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and curl, like fingers reaching for me. I could feel my heartbeat thunder in my chest, each beat syncing with the relentless tapping, pulling me further into the unknown. As I stood there, frozen in terror, the tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep silence that filled the room. I took a hesitant step forward, feeling the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes on me. Then, as I reached out towards a candle, a whisper, a soft, raspy voice, echoed through the room, calling my name. It was then that I realized I wasn't alone. This place wasn't just a dream. It was something much darker, much older, and it had been waiting for me. As I stood in the eerie silence of that candlelit room, I felt an unsettling pull, a force that seemed to root me to the floor. Shadows twisted around me, bending and warping as if they had a life of their own. Each shadow appeared to pulse with a dark energy, stretching into long, distorted shapes that clawed at the walls, slithering closer with every flicker of the candlelight. My skin prickled, and a cold sweat began to form on the back of my neck. I wasn't just being watched, I was being studied, evaluated, by something unseen, something that hid just beyond the edge of perception. I tried to steady my breathing, forcing myself to take a step back. But as I turned, I noticed something disturbing. The objects in the room, the candle, a tattered chair, a cracked mirror, seemed to have shifted position when I wasn't looking, as though they had minds of their own. The chair, once facing a corner, now pointed directly at me, its decayed wood groaning as if welcoming me to sit. The mirror, old and cloudy, stood in the far corner, angled in a way that caught only the edges of the room, refusing to reflect my face. My pulse raced. I was trapped in a living nightmare, a place that twisted reality itself. The shadows continued their dance, creeping along the floor towards my feet, cold tendrils that seemed to latch onto my legs, holding me in place. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Something impossible. For a brief moment, my reflection flickered in the mirror, but it wasn't me. The figure in the glass looked like me, yet it was hollow, empty, with eyes that were nothing more than dark voids. I felt my stomach twist with fear, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I couldn't look away. It was like staring into an abyss that stared back, an infinite emptiness that seemed to swallow everything it touched. With a sudden, sickening lurch, I felt as though I was being drawn towards a mirror, my body moving against my will. The floor beneath my feet seemed to stretch and ripple, a dark, liquid-like surface that threatened to consume me. I reached out, desperate for anything to hold on to, when I noticed a small, almost imperceptible movement from the corner of the room. A door, one that hadn't been there before, now stood slightly ajar, with a faint, eerie light spilling through the crack. Ignoring every ounce of reason, I felt compelled to approach it. The air grew heavier with each step, thick with the scent of old wood, dust, and something metallic, like blood. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each more terrifying than the last. The door beckoned me, like a predator luring prey into its lair. I gripped the handle, feeling its icy coldness seep into my skin, and slowly pushed the door open. Beyond it lay a hallway that stretched far longer than it should have, lined with portraits that seemed to watch my every move, their eyes following me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. As I ventured down the hallway, The faces in the portraits grew more familiar, yet twisted in disturbing ways. They were people I recognized, but each face was contorted in expressions of fear and agony, eyes wide and mouths frozen in silent screams. A chill ran down my spine as I realized. These faces, these people, they were echoes of those who had been here before me, souls trapped in a place that defied time and logic. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the walls themselves were closing in, squeezing the very breath from my lungs. Then, at the end of the hallway, I saw a door, a heavy, wooden door covered in strange, ancient symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, knowing that whatever lay beyond was not meant to be seen by human eyes. But I was already too far in, the mansion's grip on me too strong. As I pushed the door open, I knew one thing for certain. I had crossed a line, and there would be no turning back. As the door creaked open, I was met with a suffocating darkness that seemed to swallow all light. The air grew impossibly cold, seeping into my bones, filling me with a dread I'd never known. In the center of the room stood a tall, antique mirror, its surface cracked and tarnished with age. The frame, covered in strange, intricate carvings, seemed to pulse, almost as if it were alive. I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to turn back, but my feet seemed glued to the floor, drawn forward by a force I couldn't resist. Every nerve in my body was on edge, as if I were teetering on the edge of a cliff, seconds away from falling into an abyss. I stepped closer, my eyes transfixed by the mirror's darkened surface. The closer I got, the more I felt a strange pull, as if something on the other side was watching, waiting. I forced myself to look into the glass, expecting to see my own reflection staring back. But what I saw instead was far more horrifying. My reflection was gone, replaced by an endless void, a black, bottomless chasm that seemed to stretch into infinity. The darkness twisted and writhed, like smoke caught in a glass, swirling into shapes that hinted at something alive, something sentient, lurking just beyond my reach. As I stared, paralyzed by fear, shapes began to emerge within the darkness. Figures, faint and spectral, drifting towards the surface of the glass. Their faces were twisted in agony, mouths frozen in silent screams, eyes wide and hollow. I recognized some of them, faces from the portraits in the hallway, people who had wandered this mansion before me, lost souls trapped in its grip. A wave of nausea rolled over me as I realized that these weren't just reflections. They were remnants of those who had come before, their spirits locked inside this mirror, their identities erased, leaving nothing but hollow shells. Suddenly, one of the figures lurched forward, its hand pressing against the glass from the other side. I stumbled back, my heart pounding as I watched it reach toward me, its fingers long and skeletal, twisted in unnatural ways. It pressed harder, and cracks began to spider across the mirror surface, spreading out like a web of veins. My skin crawled as I realized that the mirror was not just an object. It was a doorway, a portal to some horrific place that defied understanding. The figure's eyes met mine, and I felt a strange pull, as though it were reaching inside me, searching for something. Desperation clawed at my chest, and I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. The air grew thick, as if an unseen hand were pressing down on me, squeezing the breath from my lungs. The figure's mouth twisted into a cruel smile, and in that moment, I understood. It wanted me. It wanted to take my place, to pull me into its world, leaving my body empty, a vessel for whatever dark force lay within the mirror. Panic surged through me as I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. I was trapped, caught in the mirror's thrall, unable to escape. With a final, desperate effort, I forced my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up, to break free from the nightmare. For a moment, silence enveloped me, the crushing darkness fading. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my room, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribcage. But something was wrong. My reflection in the bedroom mirror looked back at me, its eyes dark, hollow, a faint, mocking smile playing at its lips. I blinked, hoping it was a trick of the light, but the smile remained growing wider, as if it knew something I didn't. I stumbled back, cold dread seeping into every part of me. Whatever I'd encountered in that dream had followed me, slipping through the cracks of reality, leaving a piece of itself lodged in my mind, my soul. And in that moment, I knew. The nightmare wasn't over. The mirror shadow had crossed into my world, and there was no escaping it. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something from the dream had slipped into my waking life. My reflection seemed strange, foreign, a distorted version of myself that watched with cold, calculating eyes. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, the lingering effects of a vivid nightmare, but the feeling only grew stronger. There was a heaviness in the air, an oppressive presence that lingered in the corners of every room, like a shadow that never quite went away. My movements felt slow, as if invisible hands were holding me back, and an unexplainable chill had settled into my bones. No matter how many lights I turned on, the darkness seemed to creep in around me, closer and closer. I couldn't rest until I understood what was happening, so I began researching old estates, hoping to uncover something, anything, that could explain the mansion from my dream. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. A small, dusty article buried in the archives detailed a long-abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town, a place rumored to be cursed, shrouded in tragedy and mystery. The article spoke of strange occurrences, vanishing people, and a particular mirror that was said to consume reflections. My blood ran cold. Every detail of the description matched the place in my dream, down to the intricate carvings on the mirror's frame. Desperate for answers, I sought out the locals, hoping someone would know more. Most dismissed my questions, muttering warnings to stay away from that cursed place. But one elderly woman, her face etched with years of sorrow, pulled me aside. Her voice trembled as she recounted the tale of her father, who had once been a caretaker of the mansion. She told me how he had come home one night, pale and trembling, muttering about faces in the glass and a darkness that followed him. Within a week, he was gone, vanished without a trace, as if the mansion had swallowed him whole. She looked me in the eyes and whispered, "Those who look into that mirror never come back the same." I couldn't ignore it anymore. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture too horrific to believe. The dream wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was a message, a warning from whatever force was bound to that mirror. And then I remembered something even stranger, a fragment of my own past that had been buried deep in my memory. When I was a child, I had visited an old, decaying mansion with my parents. I recalled feeling an inexplicable fear in front of an ornate mirror, one with carvings that seemed to breathe with dark energy. My reflection had felt wrong, even then, a twisted, hollow version of myself that stared back with empty eyes. My parents had pulled me away, laughing off my terror, and I had forgotten. Until now. Unable to let it go, I returned to the archives, poring over every scrap of information I could find. My research uncovered a disturbing pattern. Dozens of people over the years had reported seeing their reflections vanish, leaving a dark, gaping void in the glass. Many had disappeared soon after, their fates forever a mystery. It was as if the mirror had a life of its own, a hunger that grew with every soul it consumed. The more I read, the clearer it became. I wasn't the first to encounter this, and I certainly wouldn't be the last. Each night, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, as if the darkness itself had eyes. I found myself avoiding mirrors, terrified of what I might see staring back. Even in the dead of night, I could feel its presence, lurking just beyond the edge of perception, waiting for the moment I would slip, would let it in. And then, one night, I saw it, the symbol from the mirror, scratched faintly into the glass of my bathroom mirror. It hadn't been there before. The lines were sharp, fresh, as if someone or something had etched them in while I wasn't looking. My stomach dropped as I traced the symbol with my finger, a shape I'd seen only in nightmares. The realization hit me with a chilling certainty. I hadn't escaped the mirror. It had come with me, haunting my every step, infecting my life with its relentless darkness. Driven by a relentless need for answers, and an even stronger fear that something had latched onto my soul, I knew I had no choice. I had to go to the mansion. I had to face whatever dark force had crossed over into my world. It was a long-abandoned place, shrouded in myths and whispered warnings. As I drove through twisted, overgrown roads toward it, an oppressive feeling settled over me, as if the shadows themselves were closing in. Every instinct screamed for me to turn back, but an invisible force compelled me forward, as if I were being summoned. The mansion loomed ahead, a hulking silhouette against the darkening sky, its broken windows staring down like hollow eyes. Its walls were overgrown with ivy, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The closer I got, the colder it became, a bone-chilling cold that seemed to seep into my very soul. Steeling myself, I stepped through the creaking front doors, which groaned as if waking from a long slumber. The interior was swallowed in darkness, the only sound a faint dripping from somewhere deep within, echoing through the empty halls. The oppressive silence was broken by the soft scuff of footsteps behind me. I whipped around, but no one was there, only the darkened corridor stretching behind me. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow slipping out of sight just as I turned. My heart pounded as I moved forward, the fear escalating with each step. As I wandered deeper into the mansion, I began to notice subtle, horrifying changes. Mirrors were everywhere, cracked, covered in grime, some tilted at unnatural angles, as if they were deliberately placed to watch my every move. In each one, I saw glimpses of shadows, figures moving just beyond the glass, their eyes wide and hollow, following me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. And then, I encountered someone else, an old groundskeeper named Samuel, his face as worn and ghostly as the mansion itself. He seemed to materialize out of the darkness, his eyes filled with a haunted look. He spoke in a hushed voice, as though the walls themselves were listening. Samuel recounted his own experience, how he'd once been trapped by the mirror's lure, haunted by his reflection, until he'd somehow managed to escape. But he warned me, once the mirror sees you, it never lets go. It's always watching, waiting to pull you back into its shadows. Samuel's words sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't alone in this nightmare. There were others who had fallen under the mirror's spell, and I was the latest victim. Driven by terror and desperation, I pressed him for answers, but his face grew pale. He told me of a room, a hidden chamber deep within the mansion, where the mirror's power was strongest. It was said to hold the remnants of those who had been consumed, trapped forever in its dark reflection. The knowledge filled me with dread, yet I knew I had to see it, to confront the heart of this evil, if I ever wanted to break free. Samuel led me through twisting corridors, each darker and colder than the last, until we reached an iron door at the end of a narrow hallway. Strange symbols were carved into the door, faintly glowing with an unnatural light. I hesitated, feeling an intense, primal fear rise within me, but Samuel urged me forward. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open, revealing the room beyond. Inside, the air was suffocating, thick with an energy that felt almost alive, like an invisible presence pressing down on me. At the center of the room was the mirror, the same one from my dream, its cracked surface reflecting nothing but darkness. Around it lay objects that seemed strangely familiar. Pieces of jewelry, watches, even shoes, tokens from those who had been lost to the mirror, each one carrying a lingering trace of fear, like echoes trapped within the glass. The mirror's surface seemed to ripple, a dark, liquid-like void, inviting me, daring me to look closer. I felt the weight of the mirror's gaze on me, a darkness that reached out, pulling at my very soul. The shadows around the room seemed to close in, pressing against my skin, whispering my name in voices that sounded both familiar and foreign. I knew in that moment, that the mirror was not just an object but a gateway, a portal to a realm beyond comprehension. And as I stared into the abyss, I felt it staring back, a malevolent force that wanted nothing more than to consume me. A sense of desperation took hold, and I knew I had to make a choice: flee and risk this curse following me forever, or confront the darkness within that mirror, hoping that somehow, some way, I might reclaim the piece of myself it had already taken. But as I reached toward the mirror, my reflection flickered to life, smiling, a twisted, hollow version of myself, mocking, waiting, eager to pull me in. I stood, paralyzed, in front of the mirror, watching as my reflection twisted into something horrifyingly familiar, yet deeply alien. It was me, yet it wasn't. My face looked warped, stretched by an unnatural grin that cut across my face, eyes hollow and dark as the void itself. The figure in the mirror was taunting me, its expression twisted in a sick mockery, as though it knew all my fears, all my secrets. My heart raced, and every fiber of my being screamed at me to look away, but I couldn't tear my gaze from that grotesque version of myself. I was trapped, held captive by the mirror's pull, as if the reflection had reached through the glass to hook its claws into my soul. As I stared, helpless, the air grew colder, almost freezing, and a dark mist began to seep from the edges of the mirror, curling around me like smoke. The walls of the room seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a slow, rhythmic pulse that matched the pounding of my heart. The mirror itself began to hum with a low, menacing sound, vibrating as though it was alive. And then, in a single, horrifying instant, the glass surface shattered outward, its cracks forming a web that seemed to radiate a dark, pulsating energy. Out of the cracks, a hand emerged, skeletal and gray, reaching toward me with long, bony fingers that moved with unnatural grace. It stretched closer, the fingertips hovering inches from my face. I stumbled back, but there was nowhere to run. The door had vanished, replaced by solid walls that seemed to close in around me. The hand beckoned, curling its fingers, as if inviting me forward. Behind it, other shadowy figures began to appear, emerging one by one, their eyes blank and their mouths twisted into silent screams. They reached out, clawing at the air, desperate to escape the darkness that bound them. A sense of overwhelming dread washed over me. The figures weren't just shadows, they were souls, remnants of those who had been trapped by the mirror before me, cursed to live in a world of endless darkness. And now, I was next. I felt the weight of countless eyes on me, 1,000 hollow gazes staring, waiting for me to join them in the shadows. The skeletal hand reached further, its fingers grazing my skin, icy cold and searing at the same time, filling me with a terror that stole the breath from my lungs. Desperation clawed at my chest, and I knew I had only one chance to break free. But the mirror seemed to sense my thoughts. The dark mist thickened, swirling around me, clouding my mind and wrapping me in its icy embrace. My reflection's twisted grin grew wider, almost splitting my face in two, as it whispered in a voice that sounded like my own, but hollow, empty. "You are already mine," it hissed, the words seeping into my mind like poison, twisting my thoughts, making me question if I could ever truly escape. Then, in a moment of clarity, I remembered something Samuel had said, that the mirror's curse could only be broken by facing the darkness within it. Taking a shaky breath, I forced myself to step closer to the mirror, my heart hammering with each step. I reached out, feeling the cold glass under my fingers, my hand trembling as I pressed my palm against it. For a brief second, I felt strange pull, as if something within the mirror was trying to drag me in. The shadows wrapped tighter around me, pressing down, filling my ears with whispers and echoes of the souls trapped within. And then, with a surge of willpower, I pushed back. The mirror cracked beneath my hand, splintering further, the fractures spreading out like a spiderweb. My reflection screamed, a sound that resonated through the room, shaking the walls, but I didn't stop. I pushed harder, pouring every ounce of fear and defiance into that single act. The mirror shattered, pieces flying outward, slicing through the air, and in that instant, the shadowy figures vanished, their twisted forms dissolving into nothing. The room fell silent, the darkness receding as I stood alone, surrounded by shards of broken glass. The mist dissipated, leaving a heavy, unnatural silence in its wake. I staggered back, my vision blurring, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. But as I looked down, I noticed something chilling. A single shard of the mirror lay at my feet, and within its fractured surface, my reflection still stared back at me, smiling that same twisted grin, its dark eyes locked onto mine. Before I could react, the shard disappeared, crumbling to dust before my eyes. But the sense of dread lingered, and I knew the mirror's curse was far from over. I had escaped, yes, but something had come back with me. And as I left the mansion that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that every reflection I passed was watching, waiting, a piece of that darkness forever bound to me. The mirror had marked me, and I would never truly be free. Waking up in my own bed felt like stepping into a dream, but the relief was short-lived. As dawn broke through the curtains illuminating the room, a gnawing fear wrapped around my heart, squeezing tighter with each passing second. I looked in the mirror on my dresser, half expecting the malevolent grin from my reflection to greet me once more. Instead, I found only my own weary face staring back, but even that was unsettling. The eyes were too dark, too hollow, as if they still bore the weight of the shadows I had faced. I blinked, trying to shake off the feeling, but the image lingered like a bad taste in my mouth. In the days that followed, I couldn't escape the sense of being watched. No matter where I went, a cold chill would follow me, a lingering presence just outside my line of sight. I found myself avoiding mirrors altogether, covering them with cloth, desperate to shield myself from any glimpse of what I might see lurking behind my reflection. But the shadows still crept into my life, manifesting in fleeting glances and whispered echoes of the past. Every time I passed a reflective surface, a panic would seize me, leaving me breathless as I hurried by, convinced that the darkness was waiting to reach out and pull me back. Then came the moments of déjà vu, where I would catch myself staring into a reflective surface, windows, puddles, even the glossy screens of my phone, only to feel a shiver run down my spine as the familiar dread returned. One evening, while washing my hands in the bathroom, I glanced at the mirror, and there it was, a fleeting shadow in the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but nothing was there. My heart raced as I forced myself to breathe, telling myself it was all in my mind. Yet, deep down, I knew I wasn't alone. What unnerved me the most were the symbols that began to appear, carved into wood, etched into the condensation on my bathroom mirror, and even scribbled on scraps of paper I had never written. Each symbol mirrored the dark markings from the mansion, reminders of the malevolent force that had pursued me. I couldn't escape it, no matter how hard I tried. Each new appearance felt like a taunt, a message from the darkness, assuring me that it would never let me go. Then, one stormy night, as thunder rumbled outside and rain lashed against the windows, I heard a noise, a faint scratching, as if something was trying to claw its way into my reality. It was coming from the hallway. Heart pounding, I crept towards the sound, every instinct telling me to turn back, to run. But I had faced the shadows before. I couldn't let them control me any longer. I reached the hallway, and the scratching grew louder, more frantic, echoing against the walls like a desperate plea for help. I found myself standing before the mirror at the end of the hall, its surface gleaming ominously in the dim light. The air around it felt charged, crackling with a dark energy that pulled me closer, as if it were a magnet, drawing me toward the unknown. And then I saw it, the reflection of my own terrified face, but there was something else behind me, a shadow lurking just out of sight. I spun around, but again, nothing was there. Panic surged through me, and I turned back to the mirror, compelled by an unseen force. The shadow loomed larger in the reflection, stretching out toward me, its form darkening the edges of the glass. A cold fear gripped my heart as I realized I was once again facing the darkness I had thought I had escaped. The whispering began again, a cacophony of voices that seemed to swirl around me, echoing my own fears, my own doubts, threatening to pull me back into the depths of despair. "You cannot escape," they seemed to chant, resonating with a chilling finality. In that moment, the symbols in my mind became clearer, aligning with the whispers that echoed in my head. They were not just warnings, they were the key. If I wanted to free myself from this curse, I needed to confront the darkness, to face it head-on, and to uncover the truth behind the mirror's power. I felt a surge of determination rising within me, igniting a spark of courage amidst the terror. But as I stepped forward, ready to challenge the shadows, the room plunged into darkness. The lights flickered, and I felt a cold hand clasp around my wrist, pulling me back, away from the mirror. The whispers turned to screams, echoing through my mind, drowning out my thoughts. In the chaos, I was thrown to the ground, the mirror's surface shimmering as though it were alive, eager to reclaim its lost prey. The world around me began to spin, the shadows coiling tighter around me, threatening to engulf me in their relentless grasp. In that instant, I understood the depth of the mystery that had ensnared me. The mirror was more than just a reflection. It was a living entity, a dark force feeding off fear and despair. As I struggled to break free, I realized I had to confront my own fears, to find a way to turn the darkness against itself. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went silent. I opened my eyes to find myself alone in my room, the moonlight streaming through the window, illuminating the fragments of shadow that lingered like a memory. I took a shaky breath, the echo of whispers fading into the night. But the fear remained, a persistent shadow clinging to my heart, reminding me that the nightmare was far from over. Was it all just a dream? Or had I truly awakened from the dark grasp of the mirror, only to find myself entwined in its web once more? The connection between my reality and malevolent force was stronger than ever, and as I peered cautiously into the nearest reflective surface, I felt the icy breath of the darkness hovering just behind me. If you too have felt the pull of the unknown, the lingering shadows that haunt your thoughts, subscribe to the channel and share your theories. What does this all mean? How do we break the cycle? Leave your comments below, because sometimes the nightmares don't end when we wake up. Sometimes they follow us, waiting for the right moment to strike. And in the quiet moments, when you least expect it, the darkness can come creeping back.